Good morning and afternoon and evening, and welcome to the Climate Cafe Multi-Faith. Our guest today is Ram Appalaraju. He is joining us as in a variety of roles. He is a Buddhist chaplain, also works with Eco-Chaplaincy, and he is also trained in MIT's En-ROADS climate modeling, which he is going to share with us today. A little bit more about Ram. He spent his professional career in high tech, and serving as a Buddhist eco-chaplain allows him to make these spiritual connections as well with nature, centering compassion and care. He has a deep care for the ecological world and climate change and the damage that is happening, and how we can bring our hearts and minds to it in a good way with a right intention, as he would say. And he is going to bring kind of all of that together as we explore that intersection, faith, science, climate change, and how we can together with all these different tools better learn how we can come to solve, bring hope, all those things that we need in climate circles and faith circles and for our good planet Earth. So thank you and welcome, Ram.
Thank you, Rashinda. So beautiful to be with all of you. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and it's just heartwarming to listen to your introductions, where you're coming from, how you're looking at the climate crisis in a very, very thoughtful way. I mean, there is so much work to be done, but there is so much to feel encouraged about. There is this forum is deeply nourishing to my mind just to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Just to quickly introduce myself, just a couple of days ago, I celebrated my 40th year being in this great country. I came as an immigrant in 1982 with a couple of suitcases and a $2,000 loan to pursue a graduate school degree. And the rest is history. And I come from India originally. As Rashinda mentioned, went through tech business and the tech industry. In my mind, I have carved out different segments. There is a physics and engineering aspect of it. There is spirituality aspect of it, community engagement aspect of it. And we all do this in our own way. We try to take on a different roles to engage in each one of these areas. I was brought up as a Hindu, that I pursued a path of Vedanta much more seriously for over 20 years. I still are immersed in that. So I work at the intersection of Buddhism and Vedanta. Let's look at it that way, right? So today, as Rashinda mentioned, I'm a chaplain at the jail, and I'm also faculty for training next generation chaplains at the Sati Center for Buddhist Studies. So that takes a bit of my time. And I sit on the board. I heard a couple of people beautifully say they come from schooling and teaching kids. And I'm in the board of a group called Environmental Volunteers Group, where we teach kindergarten through fifth graders on everything about ecology. Take them through bird adaptations, to trees, to recycling, to you name it, the whole gamut of the important knowledge that I wasn't privy to when I was young. And we have a great opportunity to bring that thought process into these beautiful young minds, and as well take them on a nature walks, show them the relationship between us and nature. We'll talk more about that. Okay. So I think my topic is addressing the climate change in a meaningful way. And I want to bring from the perspectives of four of them, right? Buddhism, ecology, science, and advocacy. Right? Those are the four areas. In today's presentation, I'll touch on all four things, but we spend bulk of the time on the science aspect of it. So I chose the word spirituality very carefully because it means different things to different people, right? That's my experience. One of my most profound experience of the word spirituality jumped out at me when I read about this anecdote when Dan Rather was interviewing Mother Teresa. This was in Calcutta. I'm what I call a huge devotee of Mother Teresa. What she has done for the marginalized people in India is something amazing, right? So the interview was going on, and then Dan Rather asks Mother Teresa, what do you say to God when you pray? right? And Mother Teresa responds, I don't say anything, I just listen. And what does get? Then rather says, what does God say to you? And Mother Teresa quickly responded, he doesn't say anything, he just listens. And if you don't understand that, I can't explain it to you. Right? That there is so much spiritual depth in that short conversation, right? And that's a connection I started developing with nature. Can I describe it? Yeah, as a physics and science perspective, I can describe it. But how do I describe my feeling for it? So I wanted to really marry Buddhism, the teachings of Buddhism, into the spiritual natural care and put on a spiritual dimension. Very quickly, Buddhism 101. Okay. So Buddha's path, in my view, although I come from a, like I said, Hindu and Vedanta background, I look upon Buddhism more as a way of life than a religion, right? That's my personal view, okay? And basically, he starts off by saying, look, the path is for inner view, for self-discovery, so that you can do something about your mind and thoughts. I'll tell you what worked for me. This is Buddha's teaching. And you could try it and you figure out yourself. He didn't say, this is the doctrine, this is how you shall follow. And there's a Pali word, which is the language that most of the Buddhist scriptures are written in. There's a word called ehi pasiko. That is the profound aspect of Buddhist teaching, which translates to explore and find out for yourself. Right? That summarizes. Then it gets into specifics of teaching, the Four Noble Truths. The first truth is there is suffering in the world. In modern parlance, you can say life sucks. But he didn't stop there. Okay, the reason for it is we cling to certain outcome. We want certain things to happen. That wanting and clinging translates to suffering. Right, and then he says, the path to end suffering is letting go of the clinging, and the path is defined by what's called the Eightfold Path. He gives 8 steps. And he takes the 8 steps and breaks them into 3 categories. The first, he calls them 2 of the steps into wisdom category, right? Establish right intention or resolve and have a right view. We'll talk more about it in the context of climate change on these 2 topics. Okay. Then there is a moral and ethical steps, right livelihood, right action, and right speech. He talks into divisive speech, proper speech, compassionate speech, loving speech. All of that stuff comes under the moral and ethical way of engaging within ourselves and outside of ourselves. And the third step is the mindset, how we approach these steps, which is called the mindfulness steps, is how do we condition ourselves to put right effort? How are we learning to be mindful? And how do we focus and concentrate on things that are important for as many beings as possible? That's a summary of the Buddhist path. Right? And then he goes off and says, create a heart condition first before you jump on it. This is the mind and heart have such a complex term. No one knows to point out where mind is. In Asian culture, we don't use the word mind here. When we say chitta, the word in Sanskrit and Pali, we show here. We show the heart, not here. This is a thinking muscle, right? But whereas mind is a heart and mind, you can call it that way, right? And the heart conditions Buddha advised, or at least trained and taught us to cultivate, is start with kindness. Use the word loving kindness. Second is compassion. And both these words, there should be an adjective in before this called unconditional kindness, unconditional compassion. And the third one, which is the critical thing that I struggle to cultivate, I'm still developing that, is called sympathetic joy. Genuinely feeling joy for other people's success. You can think of this as an opposite of envy or jealousy. Okay, but appreciate even the smallest of small positive thing the other person and experience it as it is own. And the last part he talked about is equanimity. How do you develop even keenness in your mind? So you got Buddhism 101 in 90 seconds. Okay, and the idea was to take this into the nature-based relationship. And that's what my chaplaincy training was all about, is to really build and cultivate a relationship in nature. This starts with fundamentally looking at, is there a duality? Is there a me and nature, or as me as a part of the nature? When I say I care about nature, am I saying that is different than me? So all of this thing we are experiencing suffering has got a deep level of not just interconnectedness, but interdependency in all of them. And that's how we are cultivating to more and more to build a meaningful engagement. And this forum is a classic example of it. None of this, what I'm saying, is new to you. I can absolutely say this is where your hearts are, right? At the same time, when I looked at my own life as trained as a chaplain, one thing what chaplains are trained to do when I go in jail or when I go to ecological organization is be able to relatable to other people's pain, anxiety, and suffering, right? And to me, we're living in a world today, if you turn TV on, turn newspaper on, you don't have to go into second page or third page. Topics like biodiversity loss, ocean degradation, urban flooding, political strife, climate crisis, the immigrant migrations, economic instability, food shortages, wildfires, soil degradation, right? You can just list on and on and on. These things just shine at you that you cannot avoid them. And this thing manifests in a different way to each one of us. I spend time with the youngsters, teens, and early 20s, and their reaction to all of this, or even most of us, I would say, when you hear this, our processing is such that we tend to respond with anger, helplessness, despair, frustration, grief. These are all natural human emotions. But we care about this planet so much that these emotions, if I'm not careful, paralyzes me. It's not an action I can take. And this is where the Buddhist path of, yes, I have a right effort and I have a moral and a right effort to do here, but I got to let go of this emotion of despair and all that stuff and get to business, get to work in the most meaningful way. That's where the path helps me to engage in. Okay. Climate change is real. There is no reason to debate that. But what can we do about that, right? So let me go to the next slide. This may be overwhelming, but me lay it out to you. The important thing in the slide is this graph shows how much carbon dioxide has been building up in the air and how much it oscillates. And the data on the x-axis at the bottom going back 800,000 years. Okay. And their science has the capability to dig deep into the Arctic and Antarctic and go miles and miles deep with different technologies and assess the carbon molecule there and then build the age out of it. There's a degree of accuracy to determining the climate cycles around these areas. And if you take, for example, in water vapor in the atmosphere, the water vapor lasts at best a couple of days, max. And then it dissipates into rain or whatever, dew, whatever it is. Whereas carbon dioxide, if it dissipates into the atmosphere, it sits there for thousands of years. The both chemicals, one is H2O, the other one is a compound with C in it, CO2. And the CO2 goes up, it sits there, and nothing we can do about it. Okay. And this is how the cycles have been for over nearly 1 million years, for the lack of a better term. But the scale doesn't really justify. I'll show you in more detail. We jumped from somewhere in the order of 200 to 250 parts per million by volume and shot to over 400 parts per million volume, very dangerous condition where we are in, and that is causing climate change, which means we are all masked by this big gas, and inside the thing, when the sunlight comes in, it's burning up, and for this, nowhere to go because there's a shield up there. And this is the starting point of the problem. How do we bring this line down, and how do we go about doing that? Now, the consequence of this year, this is particularly, I chose 1880 to 2022, is how the Earth temperatures has been going up at the same time. The 1880 you can look upon as the transformational year on human existence, because that's around the time Industrial Revolution became mainstream. Okay. The philosophical side of Industrial Revolution is before that. If you read the philosophers Goethe or any one of those times in the time, they all really taught, preached, whatever you want to call, about interdependent, interconnected with nature. One of the greatest books I ever read is, this is by Alexander van Humboldt. The book is called The Invention of Nature, right? And he talks through the philosophical side as much as his own experience. And what happened in the Industrial Revolution and after is what we are paying the price today is the thinking of Cartesian, Newtonian and Cartesian thinking, which developed into reductionistic thinking. What it translates to is ignore nature, ignore everything else. Let's make one widget and sell lots of them and make money. That's a summary of my view of how that whole teachings evolved, right? And that's the world we are stuck in. And the consequence of that is we are raising the Earth temperature by carbon dioxide going up. See, the blue line is the CO2 going up, and the green line is how we are heating up the Earth temperature. We crossed 1 degree. In this process, we not only had the climate change calamities, floods, fires, and all the stuff. Nowhere in the history of humankind, we never lost this many species in this short a window. Just in the US, okay, US Fish and Wildlife Institute tracks certain endangered species. Just last calendar year, they declared 31 of them as extinct. That's all they could track. Doesn't mean that's all they were extinct. I mean, just to me, it's like a last human on the earth dying. And that species is no more. It's hard for me to believe it doesn't have the consequences of the balance of the ecosystem, particularly from biodiversity standpoint. So the 1.2 degrees, people may not relate to, oh, it's only a couple of degrees or 1 degree, but this is path to death for every species. It could be us doing this. Okay. The whole science community is going after how do you bring it down. There was a Montreal Convention, Kyoto Convention, Paris Accord. They all finally, as science started to get better and better, we got to bring it down to 1.5 degrees. You all must have heard that number many times. And do you have time to do that 1.5 degrees? And the science wants it. Look, we're going to pay a tremendous price in the process, but we need to bring it to 1.5 degrees. That's a monumental challenge. I'll explain why. Okay. This is where we are today. If we do nothing today, by 2100, we're going to hit 3.6 degrees. Humankind, as we know it, the word challenged is a significant understatement. I circled a little blip here. You see this thing that really took a dip a little bit here? I don't know if you can notice it. That's what pandemic offered. Pandemic actually helped climate change, right? And if I look and blow that point out, in 2019 to 2021, the global greenhouse gas emissions dropped significantly. We were not driving. And if you track the industry, every one of the industries' production went down, and they're not sending out carbon dioxide either. We all got hurt. This pandemic was devastating. We lost over 1 million people here in the US, millions of people around the world. This is a big challenge if you look at it, right? We want to serve the planet. We can't afford to have this kind of a pandemic kind of scenario. And this world event, this is not the first time. If you go back since 1960, look at all the time climate change benefited or climate improved. First oil crisis, second oil crisis, dissolution of Soviet Union. And the percentages are significant. And COVID pandemic brought that down by 5.4 degrees. So this is not a right way to do climate change, right? So this is how history has taught us. Now, if I look at our life today, we are close to 8 billion people in the planet, right? What we do generates carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. They really fall into these 5 buckets. Energy supply, 34% of all CO2 comes from coal, oil, bioelectricity, all of them. Industry, production. Land and forestry use, including methane. Methane is also a greenhouse gas. Transportation, one of the big culprits. And the buildings we live in, energy consumed. Okay. So how the MIT has developed a model is, let's look at the drivers for almost 99% of this carbon dioxide and methane and try to build some models around it. Okay. They started with, okay, energy sources. Where do we get from? Coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, and potentially future new zero carbon, like fission, nuclear fission kind of stuff. It's not there yet. I'll make a comment on bioenergy, right? Paris Accord was signed, and it really bothered me on one thing in 2015. I know Obama signed it and all the wonderful, it's the right thing to do. But what Europeans snuck in is they have a huge amount of thermal power plants there, driven by coal. In the name of bioenergy, they replace coal with wood chips. The logic is wood is replaceable or it's renewable. But the thing is, Southeast United States became a major exporter of deforestation and wood chips to Europe. So their logic at the time was, look, the trees grow back. But the point is the trees they're cutting grows back over 90 years. But it's not just the tree. When you remove the tree, you affect the biodiversity of all the beings out there. That consideration was lost. Huge number of us from scientific community wrote letters to IPCC, this interpanel, the climate change in United Nations, which challenged them this assumption. They fixed it by the time they came to Glasgow. So our voice matters, whatever we do. We'll talk more about that. Okay. Then we talk about lifestyle, transportation, land and forestation. And of course, the biggest drivers are we still want to have a healthy economic growth and population will continue to grow. Okay, this is the problem statement. The one thing about science is they're never going to say they're 100%. What they're going to say is, based on the data we analyzed, this is what we see. Are we 100% sure? What they say is 98.8% sure. They'll come up with some data, but they will also say, if things improve, we will revise these numbers. So the actual models go for anywhere from 3.6 to 4.4, depending on which model. Oxford has their own set of models. Yale University has their own set of models. Princeton has their own set of models, but they're not that far apart. But all of them, the consensus is what is causing this factor. That is important, right? And let's see what we can do. Now I'm on the live model. This is the actual model on the MIT's website. They update the data on it every month. So what we are looking at it is the data as of end of August. Last week of August is when they update the data, from my understanding is. And you see the MIT Management Sustainability Institution at the bottom right, and the Climate Interactive is the name of the organization, and En-ROADS is the name of the software, it's in the top left. Okay. What you see on the top left is all the energy we are producing each year, exajoules per year, by different sources: coal, oil, gas, renewables, bioenergy, nuclear, and the new zero. Okay. If you pay attention, the green one is the renewables, and think of renewables today as largely solar and wind. Okay. And we are not there yet. Most of the energy comes from fossil fuels, the blues, the greens, and the browns. Okay. Now, the knobs we have is the energy supply. We're going to play around with this in a second. How we move around, transportation, where we live, buildings and industry, population growth, and then the land where we produce our crops and farming, methane and other gases, effects of deforestation, And how we can fix it, one of them is often here, we can plant lots of trees, right? And then it'll help. I mean, what do trees do? They absorb carbon dioxide and leave out oxygen, which is supposed to be the way it works. But just to get started, if I push the afforestation, we plant all the trees we can, it barely moves by 0.1 degrees. And the reason is, if you look at our planet, it's 20% land, 80% water. We don't have enough land space to plant that many trees. So we need approximately 6 North Americas land-wise to plant trees to have a meaningful effect in this projection. Yes, continue planting tree, but don't expect much, right? It's a right thing to do. Where it makes most sense, planting trees, in how urbanization changed the tree density. If you look at inner cities, by science, but data shows, economic data shows, more marginalized people live in the inner cities. On an average, there is one tree over 20, 30, 40,000 people in some areas. Whereas if you go to affluent suburbs, a backyard has dozens of trees, right? There's a disparity there by itself. So it does make a lot of sense to plan tree planting as a part of inner city dynamics. Right? We'll talk more about that. But let's look at the other one. I mean, some of the emotional reactions I had, probably you had as well, is let's tax the coal guys. Let's reduce the subsidy, right? Let's tax the natural gas and even bioenergy. We do all this, we drop it by 0.2 degrees from where we need to be. Okay, we're going to pump up solar and wind, raise it up as much as we can. Let's say, yeah, we brought it down by another 0.1 degrees. Nowhere close to where we need to be. Okay, some people claim nuclear. It's really not there because it takes, even if you start building a plant today, it takes 30 years for it to go production. There's a huge built-in time that's baked into this model. Okay, I won't touch new carbon because the technology doesn't exist today. We'll deal with it at some point. Okay. Then we look at the consumption side. Okay, so if you go back in 60s and 70s, you got 10 to 15 miles per gallon on certain cars. Today they're 20 to 30, and assume we improve the efficiency even within fossil fuels high, you'll start to see some difference. Or you want to go more into the electric cars. It certainly helps. How about buildings? Less fossil fuel, more efficiency, more, attic insulation, side insulation, whatever you may want to call it. It has I'll talk about the Inflation Reduction Act vis-a-vis this model in a few slides. What does the bill do to help with these numbers? And then we try to bring solar on top of buildings, we bring it further down. Okay, still we're not there at 1.5 yet, right? We stopped deforestation. Yeah, the curve certainly helped a little bit. And let's say we consume less from farm animals and really reduce methane gases, you start to see some significant difference. And this is what was approved at the Glasgow summit last November, when all nations pledged that they're going to work towards reducing methane gas. And I don't know if you watched John Kerry's presentation on methane gas reduction at that COP26, he used exactly the same software on the forum to make the point. Okay, we are around 2.4 degrees right now.
So, Ram, can I just jump in? I'm sorry. That's amazing. So this is literally what we're looking at is a graph of the agreement from Glasgow. Is that? Right. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing. Thank you. Sorry.
So they all made the pledges. We're going to do pledges, but the pledges doesn't mean actions, right? So that's where the model says execute on the pledges. The scientific community is putting pressure on the policy people to do that. We'll talk more a little bit about that. Now, couple of things I haven't touched yet, right? There is this thing called carbon price at the bottom left. Okay, what this is let's tax the people, industry who are producing carbon for amount of damage they're doing directly to the company level. Europe already passed this. Canada passed this. Okay. In Canada, they said if there is a polluter, they pay $190 per gigaton of carbon dioxide that is sent out. After the meeting, I'll send you a link to podcast, which I can send it to the team. It really describes what political process they had to go through to pass that legislation. Even the conservatives in Canada were backing that move, right? And Scandinavian countries, Germany and France, they all have gotten this carbon tax thing. But in Canada, in Scandinavian countries too, what they did is they know if you really tax it, these people will pass the price increase back to the people. That's what the nature of the industry is. So what they collected the money, and the government didn't keep any money. They passed the money directly to the people as dividends. Take it. We collect the cash from them. That's the equity issue. And they made that equity issue tied to the income level of people. If you're poor, you get more money back so that you can afford things in spite of the price increase. And they also set aside some money specifically for indigenous groups and tribes. It's a very reasonable, I won't call it ultra social, but it's a fair way to take the damage that is being done. And the other aspect is anytime certain things price go up, innovation hastens. People find a new way to go to solar and wind and others and be less dependent on that. So let's assume we do some significant carbon tax. You brought it down to 2 degrees right now. That's a big change from 2.7. Now, this is the path we are on. We were at 2035. We are still way high than where we need to be for the targets we have set for ourselves to get towards 1.5 degree. That is the holy grail, right? But we were nowhere close. And what the Senate did is essentially, if this bill is executed, we have a chance of achieving that by 2035, in the next 13 years. And this is modeled by Princeton Labs, from Princeton University Zero Lab, based on the projections from IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. So if you blow this part up even more from 2022 to 2035, and effectively what this IRA does is approximately 1 billion tons of CO2 reduction will happen. Right? And this is something we can be hopeful for. I always think about, is there a basis for being hopeful? And I get, is it hope? Is it optimism? What's the right word for it, right? There is no easy answer. In Buddhism, we use the word right aspiration, which means it's not like buying lottery and praying, but it is something I can work towards achieving an outcome that's favorable for many, many, many people and species. And that's a possibility. And that we did that. There is still an effort we can make and salvage this, right? The comment I was trying to make is one thing I didn't move is there's a technology that is up and coming called carbon capture and removal. In the IRA Act, one of the things they added is $70 billion towards research and discovery or invention of the product. And let's move that, assuming we will essentially get that thing to where we want to be, you bring it close to 1.5. See, I met with my congressman here 3 weeks ago, about a month ago, okay? So I met with both the Congress people in their offices. Well, I thanked them for passing IRA, and I told them work is not done. But we need to pass the Carbon Dividend Act. He gave me 20 minutes of his time. It ended up becoming an hour-and-a-half meeting. He was fully in. And I also told him about carbon capture and store. I told him I'm come from Silicon Valley. I know investors. I know the technology. So I volunteered to help him. He put me in touch with his climate czar so that we can create a coalition in the Bay Area between investors, between technologists, and the government to find a solution to carbon capture and store technology. That's something we can attempt to do. We know the models show if you do that, it'll have a profound effect on the climate change. There are two ways, right? All these technologies, what we talked about is you go from coal to solar. It reduces the carbon dioxide. But what do you do to remove the carbon dioxide already out there? That's what this technology does. Even that, there are two ways to look at it. One is all the carbon dioxide, you want to suck it out. Or second, as the coal companies, oil companies will continue to depend on them for foreseeable future, can you capture it right at source? It's like a catalytic converter in a car, right? And that's the part I'm interested in. I'm spending a lot of time in understanding the polymer chemistry and mechanical engineering behind that to be able to work with some of innovators to devise a solution that's economic enough, not just for the US. The thermal power plants are all over the globe. It needs to be affordable so that every thermal power plant, every coal-fired power plant, every oil and gas rig should all have a capability to put that. Doesn't have to be 100%. Take out 50%, it's a win.
The other thing is while I am over the moon for what the bill does, I'm also recognizing that if we're not careful, the rules that we have voted to put in place will not actually be implemented. And so the work of vigilance to make sure that the follow through happens, it cannot be understated.
When you look at climate change, we are not addressing climate change as a priority. We are working towards what can we pass. In that process, we start making tremendous amount of trade-offs. Just 1 week before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we were all pretty much in despair. We thought this was dead. I'll take the answer. There's a lot of work needs to be done. This is not what we wanted, but I will take this.